Well, welcome to Christ in Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, and today we have a good topic. And I just got done watching the documentary. It's called by My Pillow President Mike Lindell. You've probably heard of My Pillow. Some of you may even have the My Pillow. They're supposed to be very comfortable pillows. I've never tried a My Pillow. I just use a regular Kmart or Sears pillow, $5 pillow. But these are, I would guess you would call them specialty pillows. They are $50 or so. They're pricey, but they're supposedly very comfortable and give you a really good night's sleep. So Mike Lindell is the My Pillow president, and he's also a strong Christian, and he's a strong Christian conservative and a strong supporter of President Trump, former President Trump. And so Mike Lindell is concerned about the elections of 2020, which a lot of people are concerned about the election. 70 plus million people voted for Donald Trump, and probably most of those voters are still concerned about addressing the questions that were raised about the irregularities and the difficulties and problems hovering around the 2020 election, because there were so many things that were raised as far as questions about dead people voting, out-of-state people voting, a spike in increase of 90-plus-year-old voting for some strange reason, and all kinds of irregularities and problems, changing of the laws of the states right at the last moment, attorney generals and secretary of states withholding information, not being transparent. It was a lot of confusion for 2 straight months. Now, I really actually don't want to get back into that whole mess because, but it hasn't been resolved. It hasn't been settled. We're told by the mainstream media to just go on, move on, nothing here to see. We're told by big tech, you can't talk about this thing or we'll censor you. We'll take you down off of Twitter if you're a Twitter user, or if you're going to devote a video on YouTube, it'll be taken down, and all kinds of things. The techs are censoring any discussion on this topic. Well, Mike Lindell says, I'm going to make a documentary, and I'm just going to put all of the evidence, the best evidence that I feel that the election was stolen. And we're going to discuss this. So he has an hour and a half, what he calls a documentary. Well, first of all, I would have to say that that is not a documentary. It's more of a television program where Mike Lindell sits at a news desk and he interviews some people that come in, and he also has a few graphs. And it's not as if they were on location and they were interviewing people all over the country and it was a highly edited piece of cinematic art. No, it isn't. It barely qualifies as a documentary, but that's not the important thing. It's the information that he gives that's important in as far as this issue concerned. Was the 2020 presidential election stolen or not? Was there irregularities, and was there a collaboration by people to try to steal the election from Donald Trump and help Joe Biden win the election by any means, even illegal means? Well, Mike Lindell goes into his presentation, and lo and behold, the same witnesses and the same people that we saw with the Trump legal team with Rudy Giuliani, and Jenna Ellis and others. These are the people that Mike Lindell interviews. So if you followed the whole Giuliani tour where he would go around to the different legislators in the different key states, and you listen to the witnesses, the testimony, and the evidence is given, then all of the information in this documentary you've already heard before. And so when you started interviewing these cyber experts, I've all seen them before. I've heard the arguments that they have. And I was surprised that Mike Lindell didn't go into any more detail as to how you would substantiate the accusations that were raised by the Trump team, Rudy Giuliani, Jenna Ellis, and these witnesses during the 2 months from the time of the election all the way up to the time of the swearing in of Joe Biden. So the same information was repeated here. Now, I believe that what Mike Lindell is doing is valid as far as raising these issues, but then these issues need to be investigated, and they weren't. And that was what the Trump team was trying to do for 2 months. They were trying to get some authoritative official body, whether local law enforcement or the Congress or the courts or the FBI or the Homeland Security. They were trying to get some official government body to say, look, we will look into this. This warrants an investigation. And then they would have the subpoena power. They would have the power of discovery. They could compel people who, against their own will, wouldn't want to reveal this information. They could compel them and put pressure on them to actually open the books up and let investigators in and let them do their work. So the whole purpose of Rudy Giuliani and the Trump team for the 2 months prior or after the election was to somehow get the evidence presented into a court and have a judge hold a hearing. And then the lawyers on each side could then present their case. And then you would also, like I said before, you would have subpoena power and you would have a lot of investigatory power that you don't have simply as private citizens. And that was the hindrance that Rudy Giuliani had in his team. They could not compel people to answer questions and be held accountable. Whereas if you got a government entity, an authoritative official investigation opened up, you would then be able to call witnesses. And if they didn't want to come, then you would force them to come. So, and you would be able to open up the books and open up the state election material. Whereas right now, the state election officials, they don't want to share their information. They don't want to be transparent for some reason. They want to hold on to what they have. And then if you had an official investigation, you could get them to open up the books. And then you could get a real clear indication of who are the voters, and are these legitimate voters? Are they duplicate ballots? Are there ballots that don't have signatures on them that are required to have signatures on them? And how many ballots were spoiled, and how many ballots were rejected, and how many ballots were from military, and how many ballots were overvoted, and were there people voting twice? And you can't answer those questions, all of those questions, without opening up the books to total transparency. And that doesn't happen unless there's some official investigative body that says, okay, this is what we're doing, and all of you officials must comply. And Rudy Giuliani could not get his evidence presented to any judge that would even open up the books and open up an investigation. Well, Mike Lindell brings back the same witnesses that Rudy Giuliani brought forth that we all heard. Now it's been a month or month and a half. We all heard these, or we saw clips of them, and they have the same accusations. They have the same charges. For example, he brought some of the cybersecurity experts in, and the same accusations were leveled against the voting machines, that they were able to get onto the internet, and then Mike Lindell actually repeats the same talking point that, say, Sidney Powell used 2 months ago, where she said that Donald Trump won the vote in these states by a landslide, and that he broke the algorithm, quote, quote, and that they had to then come back and backfill the ballots to make up the fraudulent tabulations that were because of the manipulated voting machines. And so then you've heard this for 2 months, right? You've heard that from Sidney Powell at first, and now she's being sued by the voting machines for all of the damage that she did. But we'll see where that ends. But okay, Mike Lindell is saying the same thing here. Now, what you would want to have done in this documentary is that you would then fill in that accusation. And you would say, okay, Donald Trump won by a landslide. Okay, show us how he won by a landslide. Don't say he won by a landslide. Don't just assert that he won by a landslide. Show us the goods. Bring the receipts. Show us the evidence and break it down so that anyone with a reasonable IQ could actually look at that and say, wow, Donald Trump actually did win by a landslide. And then when you say, and he won so big that he broke the algorithms, okay, that's a big assertion. You're saying that these voting machines were not operating on the basis of one vote comes in for Biden, that's counted for Biden. One vote comes in for Trump, that's counted for Trump. You're saying that somehow if 2 votes come in for Trump, one of those votes might actually end up in Biden's camp. And so there's algorithmic manipulation within the tabulation voting machines. That's what you're claiming here, that, Donald Trump won so big he broke the algorithm. Okay, show us that. It's not enough to just say what Sidney Powell said 2 months ago and just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. You have to actually show us the goods. Show us the receipts. First of all, show us the algorithm. Show us the program in the machine. Show us proof that there was an algorithm employed in the voting machine, and show us step by step how that algorithm was used to manipulate the votes in favor of Joe Biden and stole votes from Donald Trump. And then show us how the physical paper material ballot was manufactured or brought in to cover for that. See, if you have a manipulation in a tabulation machine, for example, you can switch. Let's say that everything that Sidney Powell was saying about the Dominion machines and everything that Mike Lindell is claiming still here today, 2 months later, let's say that there was an algorithm running in these tabulation machines so that for every 10 Trump votes, Joe Biden would get 2 for himself. He would take away 2 votes out of every 10 that Trump got. Let's say that there was some kind of a algorithmic manipulation taking place. Let's just assume that. Okay. You've got to show very clearly, with no gaps, how that actually took place and explain how it took place. And then you have to actually show how, because when you get this manipulated tabulation, you have this electronic number and it's inaccurate. Okay, but the voting system does not operate simply on the vote on the tabulation counter. There were votes done, say, like in South America and certain places, maybe even here in the United States, where there was no paper trail and it was all electronic tabulation. And so in those instances, yeah, you could if you could somehow penetrate the machine and get into the manipulating of the tabulation, you could win the vote simply on the electronic tabulation. That's not how it works in the voting today. You have a tabulation count, and then you have a hard copy paper count. And those have to be lined up. And that's the whole point of these recounts. And so what we see in the recounts is that in every instances, the algorithmic, supposedly tabulation count and the hard copy ballot proof, they did match, more or less match. I mean, you're going to find, onesies and twosies off, votes off, but more or less the hard copy ballot paper matched with the electronic tabulation count. Okay, so if you're saying that somebody manipulated the tabulation count, you're going to have to show how they also were able to inject into the system the proper number of hard paper physical ballots to match that up, because during a recount they would have to match up, or otherwise you would have this huge number for Biden in the tabulation, electronic tabulation, and then when you go recount the paper ballots, you would find, Trump actually won because there were more. See, there would be that big discrepancy, but there wasn't. So what that means is it's not just a matter of manipulating the tabulation count in the machines. You have to also manipulate the hard copy physical paper ballots to verify that tabulation. And you have to explain how that was done, and you have to show that it was done. It's not enough to show even that it could be done. You have to show how it was done. And I was hoping that Mike Lindell, with this documentary, and the title of the documentary is actually called, I think it's Definite Proof or something proof. So absolute proof or whatever. So he's using the strong term proof. He's going to prove, he's going to bring the goods. He's going to show us what we didn't know before. Not so, unfortunately. He did not deliver the proof. He delivered the accusations that we already knew. He delivered the evidence, the affidavits, and the sworn testimonies. He delivered statistical information that we already knew, but he didn't show us the proof, because to show us the proof would mean you walk us through step by step how these votes were changed in the machines, and you have to show that they were changed in the machines, and then you have to show how they were then covered physically with paper ballots, and how these ballots were injected into the system so that it all worked out and balanced. Because if you don't explain all of those things, you have a theory, but you don't have the proof. And so what we have with Mike Lindell's documentary is more accusations and more of the witnesses and more of the evidences, but we're sadly lacking in the proof. Now, he did also interview someone in Michigan who had eyewitness account and said, look, these machines were hooked to the internet. We saw the Ethernet cables coming in and out of them. There's no question that these things could have been hooked to the internet. All right. That's step one. You showed that they could be hooked to the internet. Step two, you have to show that there was some kind of data manipulation taking place in these machines, and you need to break it down. It's not enough to just say, we know these machines were hooked to the internet. That's a no, that's wrong. They shouldn't have been hooked to the internet. The machine operators and the owners said they should not have been hooked to the internet, or they were not hooked to the internet. But just if they were hooked to the internet, that in and of itself doesn't mean anything unless you can show that they were doing something illegal or wrong when they were hooked to the internet. And so there is nothing broken down that actually shows that these machines did anything wrong. There is enough question and suspicion to raise the investigation. And I really do believe that there should be a congressional investigation before the next presidential election, and as soon as possible, actually, because the longer it takes, the more, if there was something illegal, the more that could be covered up or swept under the rug. So there really does need to be a full investigation. But Mike Lindell's documentary does not break it down enough to actually prove anything. Now, he did show a diagram of internet traffic. But again, you have to break this down. You can't just show a map of internet traffic during election night and say, see, these are votes that are stolen and these are votes that are changed. You have to break these things down, and you have to step by step. Okay, this happened here, and then this happened here, and then this person did this. And we have a testimony that said that they did this, and then this, and you have to build your case. You can't just throw evidence at something and say, it's all there. No, you have to put it together, and you have to walk people through how this could have taken place. And so hopefully we can get a full forensic analysis of the voting machines that's taking place out in Arizona right now, where they actually have been given permission, a team has been given permission to go in and analyze the voting machines out there to see if they possibly could be hijacked for some kind of fraud, or they could be changed. We really should know. I mean, as Americans, we deserve to know, and as Christians, we want to know. It's a matter of truth for me. At this point in the stage of the game, it's not about whether Donald Trump wins or Joe Biden wins. It's a matter of, did Joe Biden win honestly and fairly? And if he did, then okay, fine, no problem. Did our election system break down? Did people exploit our election system illegally and tamper with the machines and change the results and break laws? And were these actions, did they lead to a election result that was fraudulent? I want to know that. I think every American should want to know that. It's very difficult when you have a mainstream media that don't want anything to do with those questions, and the tech, Facebook, Google, Twitter, they don't want anything to do with those questions because their guy won. Joe Biden, they were clearly pushing for Joe Biden. They may have even done many things that were manipulative to get Joe Biden to do that, to win. And they don't want anything of a discussion or an investigation. But we really need to know, were our elections free and fair? And the only way we can do that really is to get a congressional investigation into voter integrity. We need to answer these questions. We need to look into the situation. When you have a party, let's say the Democratic Party around Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, when you have a Democratic machine and they select all of the poll workers and they select the entire field and they manipulate the entire context of an election, is that free and fair for the opponents, the Republicans, in these key voting areas? It seems like when you have so much power as a political party in a certain area where you can basically stack the deck and manipulate things to a certain outcome, that doesn't seem to be free and fair, and it doesn't seem to allow the opposing party to have, and especially when you don't let the observers of the other party even in to observe the vote counting and tabulating. That is really suspicious. And so we need to do a thorough report and investigation on this. And I hope Congress would do that. But see, Congress now is controlled by the Democrats. They don't care about this because they won. And why would you investigate something that you won? So they have no motivation to try to bring clarity to this whole issue. But the whole documentary that Mike Lindell put forth, I believe Mike Lindell is a sincere Christian. He seems like a very turned on Christian. He seems to be committed to the truth, but unfortunately, I think he's out of his league. He's over his head in these areas of evidence and presentation. He knows, just like millions, and I think 70-some million Americans who voted for Trump, he knows that something is not right. He knows that in the middle of the night, you just don't stop counting in these key battleground states, and then lo and behold, when you start the counting, Biden surges ahead and takes the race. He intuitively knows, as a businessman, that there's something fishy going on, and it's not all legal and it's not all above board. He knows that. The problem is he doesn't have access to the kind of proof and investigatory powers that he needs to get to the bottom of the truth. He's trying to get to the bottom of the truth. He makes this documentary. He is trying to get people to take a greater look at what happened on election night. But he's gone as far as he can go. He's looking at the evidence that Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis and the Trump team presented. And he's hearing also other voices, and they're raising the questions. And so he's right in raising the questions. And I'm 100% behind Mike Lindell in raising the questions about the 2020 election. The problem is that he does not have the puzzle pieces to put it all together. And the frustration is that nobody has those puzzle pieces to put it all together, whether it's for or against, because we just don't have access to the data that we need to find out what really happened. And so, again, we need a congressional investigation. We need some official government body to say, look, we're going to look into this, and we're going to go as deep as we need to go to make sure that the American people are confident in what they do on Election Day counts. And so Mike Lindell's documentary is not so much a documentary on proof. It's a documentary more and more on the basic witnesses and evidences that were given over the last 2 months. It's more of a summary of that. There are some new things in there, but I don't think any of the new things, again, they just raise questions. They present some new allegations. But again, they need to be investigated. And if you don't get these allegations with some flesh on them, if you don't put some meat on them, if you don't, what people are saying right now is, where's the beef, from that old commercial back a couple decades ago? Where's the beef? You've got to have the goods. You've got to have the receipts. You've got to have a walkthrough. This, what happened here, and then this happened, and then this happened. We know this happened because we have evidence here, then we have evidence here, and this is what happened. We have someone explaining it here, and this, and you have to put it all together. You have to piece it together, and when you have that, then you have something. But before you have that, you just have more of this kind of, I would call it more theory than anything else. So that's my summary of Mike Lindell's new documentary. We'll see you back next time on another edition of Christ in Culture. God bless.